Hello everyone, I hope you had a good week. Before I share my Devar Torah, I just want to spend a few moments talking about a member of our Kehillah, Clive Goodman, who we sadly lost this week and whose Levaya I've just returned from. Clive was a man of sweetness, of innocence and purity, someone who always wanted to do the right thing, a person of sincere emunah, bitochen and yiras shamayim, who cared about mitzvahs and halacha and getting it right. He dealt with his difficulties with trust, positivity and goodness. He had a modesty despite his breadth and depth of knowledge and intelligence. He was a quiet man, and yet he had the ability to touch one deeply, to inspire one to think more carefully about what matters in life and what we value. The world is truly a poorer place without Clive. All who knew him will miss him intensely. Yehi Zichro Baruch. I want to speak about the character that first appears on the stage in this week's Sedra, Avraham Avinu, the first Jew and the founder of everything we believe in. Avraham is a little bit of a difficult character to understand. Avraham, the great Baal Chesed, bringing guests into his home, Omod HaChesed, the pillar of Chesed, one Avraham, and a second Avraham, Avraham the deep philosopher with a piercing intellect, who spent the first years of his life searching for purpose, meaning, and God, who wrote, according to Chazali, 400 chapter work on his search till he arrived eventually at Emunah, Avraham the great philosopher and thinker. How do these two Avrahams go together? These two qualities, that of chesed and that of deep thinking and philosophy, the discovery and founder of monotheism. Are these two Avrahams, or are they somehow one and the same? And I think the answer to the question is that they are linked in two very important and fundamental ways. You see, we live in a world where we can look at everything going on and see a competition for survival. We can see forces at work, each one struggling to live, to endure, to get the most it can out of the limited resources contained within the world within which we live. And this is certainly a true and accurate picture of life. And we can also look at a wonderful world with an ecosystem in which each form of life supports the other, in which the environment and the world in which we inhabit can only exist because everything and each part of it is contributing that which it can. And this is also a correct way of looking at the world. So which one is right? Which one is true? And the answer, of course, is both. Both have an element of truth in how one navigates one's way through existence, through life. But we need to choose which model we adopt. Because in one model we see a world of fragmentation. We see a world of disparate elements, all separate, tearing at each other and pulling in different directions. And in the other world, we see a world of cooperation, of chesed, and therefore unity, in which we're all working together. And it was this world that Avraham's chesed, his embracing of all, his desire to give, meant that he saw the world through this lens, and therefore uncovered the fundamental unity that lay behind it, and this led to his relationship to Hashem Echad, the force behind it all. So this is one insight into how Avraham, with the eyesight, the lens of Chesed, leads to Avraham the philosopher, the one who sees the intrinsic unity behind everything. But I think there's a greater depth here also. There's a medrash that speaks about Avraham's journey, and it tells us that he saw a bira de lakas, a large palace, dolek, a flame, a light. And he said, how could such a palace have come into existence without a manhig, a leader, a navigator? Miyad hates it, of Bal Habira. Immediately, says the Medrash, the owner of this palace looked down on him, revealed himself to him, and this is how Hashem arrived at his belief this is how Avraham arrived at his belief in God. Now, the normal understanding of this Medrash is that this is the argument from design. Avraham saw a lit up palace and said such a palace couldn't have come into existence off its own back. It must have been built by someone. He saw a wonderful world of complexity and design and said there must be a great designer behind it, and this is how he arrived at belief in Hashem. But if we look at the Medrash in more detail, we discover that this isn't quite what the Medrash says. Instead, the Medrash says that he saw a bira dolakat, not a palace that was lit up in a beautiful manner, but a palace that was burning. He looked at a world in which there's so much difficulty, pain, and struggle. And he said, how can such a palace exist not without a creator, but without a manhig, without direction, without a navigator, one who leads it somewhere? If we live in a world and we have the empathy of an Avram, the nature of chesed, and the desire to make it better, the realization that we can't just sit back and we need to do something about it. If we feel the pain and difficulty that sometimes exists in the world, we'll realize the only way to make sense of this is to understand that this is a world with a purpose. There has to be a direction to it, something that can be achieved from it, and that this world calls upon us to act, to try and make it a bit better and a bit different. And therefore this is the second answer to this question. Avram's quality of chesed led to him feeling the pain and hurt in the world, but it led to him realizing that the only answer was not to say that this is all meaningless, all purposeless, all random, all material, because then how are we meant to live in a world which is dolakas, which is burning? It must be the solution is we need to transcend this. We need to give. We need to be bali chesed. We need to correct it. We need to mend it. We need to improve it, because the only way of making sense of the craziness of a world aflame is by realizing that it calls upon us to do something with it, because it gives us the mission, the responsibility to make it a little better. So Avram, the Baal Chesed, Avram, the philosopher, Avram, the monotheist, are all one and the same. It's through our embracing of Chesed that we can see Hashem in the world, that we can see a world of loving kindness and discover the loving, kind force of God, of Hashem, behind it, and build our relationship with him. So Lech Lecha, we're all going to travel along with Avraham Avinu on the next stage of his journey together over the coming weeks. Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. Be well.